Number 1. I'm the sort of person who's skeptical of any claims regarding the existence of the paranormal. My wife claims to see ghosts and says that she's an empath, and I'll concede that she's a very good guesser regarding other people's emotions and the history of places and families. But I can't accept her statements as fact because they're not empirically provable. With that said, you can believe me or not, but what I'm about to say is something that even I have a lot of trouble disbelieving. I can't say I've had any supernatural experiences in my life, but there are several things that happened when I was quite young that I simply can't explain. At around 18 months old, I had either a memory or a very vivid imagination of my life before birth. I was floating up in the sky, with no land in any direction. In front of me was a kindly, middle-aged Native American man, wearing a plain white robe. He asked me if I was ready, and when I said yes, I somehow descended and experienced my own birth. I know this all sounds crazy, and I guess it could all be chalked up to me having a dream, but as I got older, things got weirder. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I started getting very distinct mental images of something extremely disturbing. What I saw was a tanned, mummified-looking, emaciated, dead face. The eyes were glassy, but somehow horribly alive, and the lips and nose were shrunken. The creepiest thing about the face was the too wide smile and a full set of very white teeth. When I was 9 or 10, I read for the first time about an expedition in Antarctica where several ill-fated members of an expeditionary group died and were left behind. Their bodies were recovered in the 20th century, and the article I was reading had images of them. I had never seen a frozen body before, but as soon as I saw those pictures, I immediately correlated what I was reading with the thing I saw in those mental images earlier in my life. From that point onwards, I started having almost real, waking visions of something that is basically my worst nightmare. It's hard to explain, more than just in my mind's eye, and yet not exactly as if they were actually in front of me. It was an 8 or 9 foot tall, frozen corpse, completely naked, with long arms and legs. It had the same face as the thing I had seen before, with shrunken features, only now it had a full body that was just as emaciated and mummified as the head and neck were. I only ever saw it on cloudy days in the late fall or winter, and always when it was between me and a window, so it was sort of backlit. It never made any motion to do anything. It just stared down at me with that horrible grin. In high school, I finally learned what this thing was. The Wendigo. For those of you who don't know, it's a mythical spirit creature in Algonquian legend. I was born in Connecticut and have about 1% Native American blood in me from 400 years ago. My first traceable ancestors in America came over shortly after the Mayflower, and one of them married a Native American woman. According to legend, the Wendigo was an evil spirit associated with starvation, the winter, and cannibalism. It either lured desperate people into eating their fellow humans during the winter, or possessed those who did resort to cannibalism. There are various stories about how the Wendigo looked, but most agree that it looks like a frozen corpse, generally taller than a human. And no, it doesn't have antlers like all those pictures you find via Google search. It can reportedly mimic human voices to lure the unwary into ambushes. Here's the thing. I experienced this before I even identified what the creature was, or knew anything about the legends. Only after almost a decade of initially seeing the Wendigo did I come across the description of what it looked like. I've done some further research, and all of the information I found from various sources all concurs with what I saw. So, I'm remotely linked to the Native Americans, with whom the legend originated. I've always had a deathly fear of dead bodies, especially mummified-looking ones, and I saw a creature from their stories long before I learned what I saw matched the traditional descriptions perfectly. I was, and still am, skeptical, but even I can't ignore these coincidences. I'm also a Christian, and therefore am quite wary of claims regarding ghosts or the supernatural. But even so, this thing has stuck with me for years. I saw it earlier today, which is why I'm relaying this. Does anyone have any insight? I've considered seeking out a highly knowledgeable Algonquian person so I can figure out what to do. But I'm torn, because I also have some reservations about that from a religious perspective. I promise this post is sincere. It sounds pretty fantastical, even to me, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just my imagination. Number 2. If the company I worked for found out I was writing this, I'd be canned immediately, so the who and where is intentionally vague. My name's T, and I deliver pizzas in a small rural town in northern Canada. The town I deliver in consists of about 25,000 people, spread out along the foothills of a large mountain range. Many people who live here are farmers and loggers and shit like that. We have a small college here too, so there's a few students from out of town living here as well. Unlike most delivery companies, the one that I work for allows people outside of the city limits to order pizza up to 50 kilometers away from our location. Our company's like that because many of the town's residents actually live out of the city limits, in the foothills where the farms are. If you're 50 kilometers away, it'll cost an extra $20. That might seem outrageously high, but believe me, people really like their fucking pizza. Obviously, this causes me and other drivers to be gone for long periods of time on deliveries. To top it off, we're open until 5 AM every night. This combination of variables has caused me to witness and be part of some really fucked up and creepy shit during my several years working here. I don't know if other drivers in different parts of the world have the same issues, but here in northern Canada, there's a lot of really creepy and questionable stuff going on. I don't consider myself superstitious in any way, but some of the things I see, I can't explain. Before anyone calls me out and says I'm the only one experiencing these things, I'm not. Other drivers and I regularly hit the bar after shifts, and some of them are really messed up over some of the stuff they've seen. I know a guy who keeps a lamp on inside of his car at night because he's so terrified of the dark after something happened to him that he won't tell anyone about. Several months ago, I want to say December, I was working a close shift, and my delivery sector was mostly the outskirts of town along the foothills and further north. Being December in Canada, there was about 6 inches of fresh snow, and only the highways and artery roads were ploughed properly. Driving the rest of the roads would be a death wish if you didn't have the right gear and experience. Luckily for me, I have an AWD car, studded tyres and chains in case things go really south, and I'm one of the more senior drivers. Being one of the few people with an all-wheels drive car, I was requested to take another pizza to the edge of our delivery range. Since the weather was so shitty, I called the number on my slip to confirm the address and to check that they still wanted the pizza. Getting the okay from what seemed like a cheery old lady, I set out down the highway. Just after I left the city limits, I noticed something alarming. All of the lights, including the street lights, were out. Assuming a power outage due to the storm, I give my boss a call to confirm it. He confirmed that it was indeed a sector-wide power outage. I attempt to give the lady I'm delivering to a call. Hey, this is your delivery driver. I'm noticing there's a power outage and was wondering if you still wanted the pizza despite these terrible conditions. She said that she did, and that she had a backup generator powering her house, so it'd be hard to miss. Knowing that I'd hooked a substantial tip, I put my blinker on and continued back down the highway. One thing you need to understand is just how dark it was. With it being later than midnight and not a single light on, the only things illuminating my way were my subpar headlights. On top of that, it was snowing quite heavily. For reference, my field of vision looked exactly like this. If my car were to die, or my headlights were to go out, I'd be completely fucked. About 10 kilometers down what I can only assume was a dirt road underneath the mountains of snow in the middle of nowhere, I came across a car in the middle of the road with its hazards on. The car was diagonal across the road, and from its tracks, I could tell it tried to stop suddenly and lost control. Moving about 20 meters from the car, I couldn't see any signs of life, and noticed that the driver's side door was swung open, and snow was piling inside the car. What alarmed me the most was what looked like blood on the inside of the window, and all over the steering wheel as well. Upon clearing the snow from inside the car, it was obvious that there was a pretty brutal accident here, as there was blood all over the driver's side. My mediocre first aid training kicked in, and my first response was to call 911 and get an ambulance out here. Pulling out my cell phone, the most cliché thing happened. There was no fucking service. Obviously there's no fucking cell service, I thought to myself. I'm out in the boonies. At this point, I'd completely forgotten about the delivery, and was pretty intent on helping whoever fucked up out here in the boonies. The chance of another car coming by all the way out here this late was slim to none, so this was on me. I managed to figure out a couple of things. Firstly, the person obviously hit something really, really big, like a moose or a large bear. The front of his car was almost entirely caved in, and both his front wheels were going in opposite directions. No way this thing was going anywhere. Drawing on past experience, I actually couldn't think of any animal that would do that much damage to a car like that. Secondly, after seeing a small trail of blood leading up the road, I assumed he probably went walking for help. This was where I made my first mistake. I followed the trail of blood on foot. Wanting to play the hero, I bundled up and set out into the storm with a small LED flashlight. I was concerned with whoever had injured themselves in this accident and getting to them safely. After about 5 minutes of walking, I realized that I had fucked up majorly as a singular thought went through my mind. What if whatever the driver hit is still out here? Judging by how big the impact on the car was, I can only assume that it was a grizzly bear or something unknown much larger. Dealing with a wounded animal in the middle of winter was something my pay grade didn't cover. After my moment of clarity, I decided my best bet was to get back in my car and get back to cell service to call 911. Not even after I had taken 10 steps back towards my car, I heard what sounded like an entire tree being torn from the ground. The noise was absolutely deafening and threw me into a wild panic. I started sprinting back to my car, but kept getting slowed down by the fact that my legs wouldn't coordinate with each other. After sprinting about 5 steps, I ate shit hard. I tripped face first into a snowbank and just laid there. Just as I was about to get up again, I heard it. I heard what sounded like heavy breathing coming from just out of my visual range. The noise was coming from where the accident happened and where my car was. At this point, something felt terribly wrong. That labored breathing sounded more animal than human, and was far too loud for any human to make. After what felt like an eternity, the breathing got louder. until suddenly I saw whatever was making that terrible noise. It had to be standing a minimum of 8 feet tall. Yeah, it was fucking standing. It was running on 2 feet, but every couple of steps it would stumble and start running like a bear. On 4 legs, it had sort of a loping gait, but then it would get back up on 2 feet and start running like a human. It was almost entirely covered in thick white fur, and would have been almost impossible to spot had it not been covered in blood. Whether or not that was its blood or the driver of the car, I never stuck around to find out. Whatever that thing was, it was too distracted to see me, and sprinted right past me down the middle of the road, still breathing as heavy as ever. After what I thought was a solid 10 minutes, I forced myself out of the snowbank and sprinted back to my car. When I got back to the vehicle, all 4 of my doors were wide open, and the pizza boxes were strewn all over the road. Not even thinking about the pizza or the delivery, I drove straight to the police station to report what happened. Officially, the police report states that the driver of the car collided with a large bear, and that the bear dragged him off into the woods and devoured him. They never found his body, but did find what appeared to be a portion of his spine, almost 80 kilometers from where the accident happened. It was a really big thing in our town. People spent weeks searching for him. Whatever that thing was that the driver hit, it's still out there. If you guys enjoyed this, I could probably get together with some of the other drivers and get some stories out of them over a few brews. If not, I have a few other really fucked up stories to share with you guys if you want. Either way, tip your delivery drivers. Number 3. A few days ago, I was walking around the land near my home. It's a big field, with 2 large hills, and a plateau on top of both of them. It was around dusk, so the sun had just set, but the moon wasn't out yet. Upon walking between the valley of sorts between the 2 hills, I saw something peculiar. A white, featureless human head, about 200 feet away. It was about 4 feet off the ground, and from what I could tell, it was pacing back and forth. It sounded like a horse when it walked, and when I went to pull out my flashlight, it growled at me. I immediately went home, deciding I didn't want anything to do with it that night. Today, a friend came over, so we decided to investigate during the daylight hours. We couldn't really find anything conclusive, but we did find some creepy things. I'll show you them in a moment. We heard howling and laughter like that of a child. I thought it sounded like the Skull Kid, to be honest. The birds just weren't flying right, and something kept watching us from the trees. Again, we heard the sound of hooves. My friend said that she could smell sulfur, but I couldn't smell anything, although the inside of my nose was burning. Here are some photos of what we found in the area. The first 3 look like some form of graves, and this last one, well, I don't really know, but they were all over the place, and some looked as if they had been burned. If you guys could help me out by telling me what you think this was, I'd really appreciate it. Number 4. Years ago, while hiking with my girlfriend in a very isolated area, we discovered we were being stalked. It was late in the day, not dark yet, but getting there. We were on a path with heavy woods on either side. We could hear movement in the woods, sounds of leaves rustling, branches snapping, etc., that seemed to parallel our path and matched our movements. However, we couldn't see anything, so we tested it. We stopped walking to listen, and the noise then stopped as well. start and stop again, and it would just keep matching our movements. I left my girlfriend on the path and walked towards the noise. I saw something that to this day I can't explain. When I saw it, it hid behind a tree and quickly ran away. It was probably 30 feet away from me when it took off. Humanoid shape, extremely tall and thin. I've always described it as almost skeletal. It was pale white. I'd estimate it was 7 foot tall or even more. It ran away very quickly, which is a good thing, because I was paralyzed with fear after seeing it. After a minute, I got my wits back a little, and went back to my girlfriend. Luckily, we didn't have far to go. That's a true story, and it made me realize that there are unexplainable things in this world. Number 5. This took place in 2008 in northern Ohio. My cousins invite me out to go on a camping trip to some hidden state park, and I happily agree because, hey, Ohio has to be better than Indiana, right? So I drive over to their house, and we pack up our tent and food, and head out in his truck for a few hours into the boondocks. After miles of twists and turns, the road starts getting bumpy, and I wake up. We're off the grid, like dirt road and grass off the grid. We park the truck and head up into the hills for a couple of miles, and make base camp on top of a hill overlooking a valley with thick trees on the edge across from us. Nightfall comes fast, and around 1 AM or so, we're sitting around the fire, and I ask what the name of the park is. Well, they break out into laughter, and say it's not a park, but native land upon some sacred hill. I call bullshit, but they name a tribe, which at the time sounded legit enough, so I didn't argue against it. A few minutes later, we hear this scream howl that just drifts across the hills and right into our bones. We all grew up hunting, and have been around the country, and we've all heard our fair share of animal calls and howls, and none of us could agree upon what this was. If anything, I'd say it was a screaming fox, but much deeper, and like a wolf because of how it carried. This goes on for a few more times, and our laughter soon becomes uneasy as it seems to be getting closer. The fifth scream sounded like it was coming from down in the valley, so we all look over in the direction. Out of the fucking tree line, we see what looks like a gangly, thin man, who from far away seems way too tall for normal. This thing takes off in a sprint on 2 legs right at us, and without hesitation, all 3 of us run off the hill and into the woods towards the car. As we reach the bottom of the hill, we hear the scream again, this time from where the camp was. After the fastest 2 miles in my life, we get in the truck and floor it off the land, and to the nearest McDonald's where we stayed until sunrise. We agreed to go back in the morning to grab our things. We do, and to our surprise, nothing had been moved or been taken. We drove back to my uncle's where we tried to joke about it and just move on. This shit didn't bother me until I looked up Wendigos online, and I became uneasy because it looked just like what we saw. The shit's real and out there. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Well, you guys really seem to like that last Skinwalker video, so I figured I'd do something a little similar this time to kind of tide you over until I find some more Skinwalker stories. Because I don't know, there's something really creepy about these Native American legends, right? I can dig it, I can dig it. Anyway, as always, be sure to smash that like button or I'll smash you, and I'll have another set of stories for you guys coming very, very soon. But until then, stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.